Dead Men Tales is brought to you by SupplyHouse.com, the easy way to order HVAC, plumbing, and electrical parts. Shop online, find a wide selection of products from industry-leading brands, and get fast delivery anywhere in the U.S. And being a pro has its perks. Apply to be a SupplyHouse.com Trade Master and get access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping and returns, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at supplyhouse.com/trademaster. That's supplyhouse.com/trademaster. From heatinghelp.com, it's Dead Men Tales. I'm Dan Holohan. I read somewhere that the most prevalent machine in the world is the electric motor. I thought about that for a while and it made sense. Just look around. But then I began to wonder what the second most prevalent machine in the world is. Turns out it's the pump. And most pumps are connected to electric motors of one kind or another, so there you go. Throw a rock and you'll hit a motor, or a pump. They're everywhere. But that wasn't always the case, which brings me to a story. Back in the days of gravity hot water heating, before we used pumps, a contractor would install big pipes to keep the resistance to flow at a minimum. The boiler would heat the water, which would then flow languidly upward and toward the radiators. It would nudge the colder water that filled the pipes and radiators above the boiler downward, creating a wonderful Ferris wheel of heat. What goes up shoves what goes down out of the way. And if you're using gravity, you can rest assured that it will be dependable. It's hard to get away from gravity. If the contractor followed the rules of gravity heat piping, the big wheel of water, that is a hydronic system, would turn like a Ferris wheel and the customer would say, ah. But then 1928 arrived, and with it came the simultaneous introduction of the hot water circulator in both the U.S. and Europe. Homer Thrush introduced his Thrush circulator to the U.S. Louis Oplander did the same in Germany with a company he dubbed Velo. Let's hear it for paradigm shifts. These newfangled pumps sped up the water that flowed in gravity systems, and when combined with a flow control valve, gave the contractor a way to control the flow of hot water between a boiler and the radiators by having one of these new gizmos they call a thermostat start and stop the pump. Those early pumps were able to move a lot of water against a relatively low resistance to flow because the pipes in a gravity hot water heating system were large. That kept the resistance to flow to a minimum. The dead men didn't need much of what we came to call pump head in those days. They did, however, have to get used to the fact that pump head didn't refer to the height of the building, but rather to the resistance to flow that the piping offered as the water flowed around the big loop. The height of the building doesn't matter because the weight of the water going up balances the weight of the water coming down. Think about the motor on a Ferris wheel, and you'll understand how a pump in a closed system really works. It's not lifting, it's turning. And that fact of life was so important to the dead men that they even changed the pump's name to circulator. They wanted to distinguish what is in a closed system from what is in an open system. Fire pump, anyone? Fast forward 20 years to 1948 or so, and we now see packaged boilers. These showed up because boiler manufacturers realized that if they included the circulator and the controls on the boiler, they could make more money while making the contractor's job easier. The circulators that came with those early packaged boilers all had the ability to move a relatively large flow of water against a relatively low head. Larger pipes were the norm in those days, and all of those early circulators ran on 1750 RPM motors. Their flow versus head performance curves were nearly identical, regardless of the manufacturer. Which brings us to the 1970s, a time when the price of fuel soared. People became more aware of efficiency, and that led to the birth of the smaller water-lubricated circulators. These ran at much higher speed, used less power, and cost less to buy. They soon replaced the 1750 RPM oil-lubricated circulators that had been on the packaged boilers for years. And that's when things got interesting, because the little circulator wound up on a packaged boiler that ranged in size from small to pretty darn big. And since the boiler manufacturer was providing them, many contractors began to think in terms of one size fits all when it came to the tiny circulator, and that led to problems. I have this delicious photograph someone sent me years ago. It shows a rather large boiler in an apartment building. A thick pipe leaves that boiler and enters a manifold that feeds 15 3/4-inch zones, each with a zone valve. Here comes the good part. Dan, the sender wrote, I have a serious problem and maybe you can help. I'm sending you a photo of the boiler and the piping that I installed. I looked at the photo again and noted that the circulator was one that Bell and Gossett called Little Red. That circulator was indeed both little and red. Dan, he continued, when I'm running just a few zones, everything is fine. But when I try to run 15 zones at the same time, most of them don't get hot. The tenants are complaining. Do you think the boiler's too small? I didn't do a heat loss before I put in the boiler. I sized the new boiler by what was there before. I don't know what to do now. Help? Clearly, he didn't have enough flow. And since he travels on the flow like a passenger on a train, he didn't have enough heat at the radiators. I asked him why he had used that tiny circulator, and he told me he had taken it off another boiler because his customer didn't like the color red. The contractor didn't want to waste the circulator, so he used it on this job instead. Waste not, want not, right? I asked him if he remembered that scene in Jaws when they realized that they're going to need a bigger boat. Yes. You're going to need a bigger pump. He asked me how much bigger, and we sized it together. And then he asked me who was supposed to pay for that larger pump, and I told him that he was, because he is the contractor, and the contractor is supposed to know more about heating than the people who hired him. He thought that was terribly unfair. Not enough flow leads to not enough heat. But too much friction loss through the piping can also lead to not enough heat because too much friction leads to slower flow, or even to no flow at all. Here, imagine a large rectangle of pipe that stretches for hundreds of yards. Install that tiny circulator in that rectangle. Got it? Good. Now, do you think the water's going to move in that circuit? I don't either. The circulator will sit there with its impeller spinning, but that will be the only thing moving. There's just too much resistance to flow in that huge circuit. The pressure drop of the circuit will act like two closed service valves, one on either side of the circulator. Someone will come along and try to purge that circuit. I guarantee that. But purging won't work for them because this isn't an air problem. It's an adventure in hydronic pumping. Like another example of this? Back in the 80s, when hydronic radiant heating was catching the attention of contractors, a guy called to ask what size circulator he needed. What sort of a job is it, I asked. Radiant, he said. I put 1,000 feet of 3/8-inch PEX in a slab. What size pump do I need for that? What's your longest circuit, I asked. 1,000 feet, I just told you. There's just one circuit? Yeah, he said. I told him he was going to need a bigger pump. Maybe you call your local fire department, I suggested. They have really big pumps. To which he said, huh? I hope you enjoyed that story. You really can't make this stuff up. And if you did enjoy it, please share it with your friends. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast. I have lots more Dead Men Tales to share with you. And I'm really enjoying our time together. Thanks for being here.